So I got asked about links to donate, so I'm going to put links forward now for people who want to put in offerings. Here are the following links where you can do that. Once again, we very much appreciate anything that you send us over here, and we hope that Yahweh blesses you for doing that. So this would be my PayPal account. You can pause this for a few minutes if you need to see it more clearly. This would be my Cash App. So if you're feeling generous and this is the app that you use, then this is where you would send me money. And then there's my Buy Me a Coffee. So if you want to donate there and that's the easiest way for you to send money, that's another place as well. I sincerely apologize that here you don't have me pushing people over in the spirit and you don't see them falling on your screen, and you also don't see me dangling from a ceiling. Entertainment is not what I'm here for. What I'm here for is to give people the truth. So, your offerings will accomplish a lot, actually. There are many projects we're working on, ranging from what will happen during the millennial age to the millennial temple to the Daniel 9 prophecies and the prophetic timelines, as well as a chronological timesheet for when each prophet wrote their books and how they overlap with one another and how their prophecies dip into the other books. And then we're also looking at the identity of Luke. We personally have come to the conclusion that Luke is not a Gentile in the sense of being an outsider from Judaism or from the original faith, but rather he is somebody who is a Hellenistic Jew, if you will. And we are going to present our evidence on that in the coming days. And we're also working on a project where we look at what the Last Supper was. Was it a Passover? Was it not a Passover? There doesn't seem to be a real smoking gun for either side. It's actually a heated scholarly debate. So I want to talk about that. For example, we're going to look at it from two different lenses. The biblical tradition says you eat it standing up. The rabbinic tradition, or law, if you will, says you eat it while reclining. And I just wanted to briefly address a comment that I had on my videos where there was a person stating, well, I believe the gospel. And by believing the gospel, I have obeyed the gospel. It's very important that you know that before there was a compiled New Testament or Brit Chadashah, any reference to the so-called gospel would actually be pointing back to the authority of the Tanakh. So what do you do with that? That's not something that they teach you. It's funny how many Christians will point to Old Testament prophecies that do actually point to Jesus, but they won't understand the connotations of those prophecies and what they mean for them. For example, in Genesis chapter 49 and verse 10, we see that Shiloh, or the peacemaker, or the maker of tranquility, is due the obedience of all the people. And when we say obedience in that sense, we don't mean believing. We mean obedience to his instructions. And how do we know that it's obedience to Shiloh's instructions that actually count? Well, we see that he will get the scepter once he comes. So we're talking about his first advent or the second advent. Well, I could argue for a little bit of both. He's operating in a kingship role when he instructs his disciples on what they're supposed to do, what they are halakhically required to do. And in the second advent, when he truly does reign as the King Mashiach, well, then he will have the identity as kingship, which is what the scepter represents. But it means that obedience is required. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, we read that whosoever does not obey this person is to be cut off from among the people. So if you're in Christendom, you want to believe Jesus, but you don't want to obey him. So you'd rather be cut off from among the people. And you know, nobody teaches you this in the Sunday church, but that's practically a one-way ticket into the outer darkness. And I'm just putting it bluntly because if you really want to be there, well, then I hope you're put far, far away where I don't have to hear your weeping and gnashing of teeth. If God willing, I make it. And for the others who make it, they probably will not want to hear your weeping and gnashing of teeth either. In 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 3, and there are scholarly arguments as to whether Paul wrote 1st and 2nd Timothy or not. We're not going to talk about that today. It says, "For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine." Oh, you don't have to obey. You can do what you want. Just lay back and let Yeshua take care of all of it for you. He says instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers, or in other words, a great number of false teachers, to say what their itching ears want to hear. It's okay, Sandy. You don't have to obey. No. Yeshua died so that nothing else is required of you. Now, to give you a preview into Luke's Hellenistic Jewish identity, we see in Luke and Acts that he starts with the temple. In other words, he starts with the Levitical worship system, with priestly genealogy, and then he ends his narratives with temple worship. Why does this matter? Well, because he's writing from inside the Beit HaMikdash. And if he weren't Jewish, you would think that some of the people who are there are going to have a major problem with his presence there. In Acts or Maaseh chapter 6 and verse 7, we read, "So the word of Elohim spread." And mind you, before we have a compiled New Testament, what is the word of Elohim? Well, it's the Torah, of course. It says, "The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of Sadducean priests, or Levitical priests, if you will, became obedient to the faith." Notice it says they obeyed the faith. Well, what is the faith? The faith involves following the first 5 books. So they obeyed the commandments. They didn't believe the faith. They didn't believe a faith. They didn't obey a faith that had their own doctrine. No, they obeyed the faith and likely believed that Yehoshua's ransom, what he did on the tree for all of humanity, ran concurrently with all of the offerings that they gave. So it's likely that when they obeyed the faith, they continued in their priestly function while believing that Yeshua was the Messiah. And to think otherwise would be to engage in abrogation theology and would go against Yeshua's commandment in the Great Commission, which is to teach them, or the nations, everything that I have commanded you. And one of the things that he commanded was not to think that he came to do away with the Torah or with the Nevi'im. Now, Luke's gospel was written to a gentleman by the name of Theophilus, and many people think that this was a high Roman consulate. But if you look at some scholars and their work, they more accurately identify him as a Sadducean high priest who served in his function from AD 37 to 41. And this interpretation actually makes a lot more sense, as he is called the Honorable. He's given a noble title by Luke so as to obey the Torah when it says, "Do not curse the ruler of your people." Well, if you're not supposed to curse the ruler of your people, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to bless the ruler of your people. And at that time, it would have been Theophilus. In other words, while we see that the rest of the Gospels remain very important to emphasizing Elohim's plan of salvation for both Ephraim and Orthodox Judah, we see that Luke's Gospel is written specifically as a proselytizing letter for the Sadducees. Be blessed and shalom.